Welcome to Tales from the Rabbit Hole. I'm your host, Mick West. This is the very first episode of Tales from the Rabbit Hole, and so I want to give a little overview of what the show is going to be about. Tales from the Rabbit Hole is a podcast of conspiracy culture conversations. Each week I'm going to interview someone whose life has been affected by the conspiracy culture rabbit hole. This is going to include a variety of people. We're going to have people who are believers in conspiracy theories. We're going to have people who used to be believers in conspiracy theories. And we're going to have a variety of other people whose lives have been affected by conspiracy theories. The family members and loved ones of conspiracy theorists, scientists who have been harassed because of false claims, people like debunkers, and investigators and writers who talk about and investigate the phenomena of conspiracy theories. Tales from the Rabbit Hole grew from my book, Escaping the Rabbit Hole, which in turn grew from my website, metabunk.org, which is a forum for investigating, debunking, and discussing conspiracy theories. I've run the website for, about 10 years now. I used to run another website called Contrail Science, which was a site devoted to looking into the chemtrails conspiracy theory, which is the belief that the government is spraying poisons or some kind of environment-altering substance out of the back of planes. And that grew into Metabunk. Metabunk led to a bunch of podcast appearances, which I found very, very fun to do. And that in turn led to the book, Escaping the Rabbit Hole, which is kind of a distillation of everything I learned on Metabunk. It's really, how do people get into the rabbit hole? How do they get out of the rabbit hole? And how can we help them? While I was writing that book, I interviewed a lot of people who were former conspiracy theorists. And I talked to people who are current conspiracy theorists all the time. And I also talked to debunkers and other people in the conspiracy culture. I think a problem that we have with conspiracy theories is a lack of communication between the different people. I think debunkers don't really understand a lot of the motivation of conspiracy theorists, and I think conspiracy theorists don't understand the motivation of debunkers. So part of the goal of this podcast is to kind of bridge that gap and let each side listen to the other in a kind of non-confrontational way and just explain where you're coming from. Conspiracy theorists, what do you believe in? Debunkers, why do you debunk? Let's just have a chat and see what happens. My first episode right now is with John, an ex-conspiracy theorist. The second episode is going to be with Mike Rothschild, who is an investigator of the QAnon conspiracy theory. And the third and fourth episodes are going to be someone who's a member of the 9/11 Truth community from Norway. So without further ado, let's go on with the first episode, John, the ex-conspiracy theorist. This is Tales from the Rabbit Hole. So my guest today is John. John runs the blog, The Ex-Conspiracy Theorist. And he also runs the Facebook page of the same name, and he's on YouTube, and I assume you're on Twitter too?
No Twitter account yet.
No Twitter, okay. But you've got a very interesting online presence with the ex-conspiracy theorist. Can you tell me a bit about how you became a conspiracy theorist in the first place?
Well, it first started when I got interested in politics and started listening to talk radio, mainly conservative talk radio, which led me to Glenn Beck. We all know his background. With my political bias, I tended to believe all anti-democrat, anti-liberal conspiracy theories, communists running the government, all John Birch Society, inspired messaging he was pushing. So as I listened to Glenn Beck, that led me to other anti-Obama outlets, which led me to Alex Jones, first with the Obama Deception movie. And that's when I started getting more into Alex Jones.
Right, that's very interesting because in the research I did in my book, a lot of people got into conspiracy theories via videos, and it's interesting to hear that you started out with the Glenn Beck thing. Can you remember some of the specific conspiracy theory type things that he was pushing back then? You mentioned the Obama Deception was Alex Jones. So what was Glenn Beck's big thing that you hooked onto at first?
Basically, it was when he introduced all the czars, and he gave a background in each individual, and this all scared the hell out of me, including the science czar. He claimed wanted to put chemicals in the water to sterilize everyone.
And Glenn Beck now has kind of done a little bit of a sea change, I think. Have you been following what he's been doing recently?
Just recently, no, but I did notice over the years, within the last 2 years, he changed his format with pushing conspiracy theories and also coming out openly of how he regrets how he divided America.
Right. It's very interesting. It's almost like he became an ex-conspiracy theorist himself. Yeah. You see that with a lot of people, even in the public sphere, who start out as very hardcore conspiracy theorists. Like Abby Martin comes to mind, and Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan used to be more of a believer in strange things, but as people get older, they tend to grow out of them. At least some of them do.
Yeah, you get to understand more how the world works if you're just like getting interested in politics or geopolitical politics.
Yeah, and there's a very interesting thing in your little bio about how you learnt about the term the New World Order. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, the New World Order is a term coined by George H.W. Bush, but it's been around for hundreds of years. But in the context of George H.W. Bush, he used it multiple times to mark the beginning of the end of the Cold War. And but me first getting involved in politics, I didn't know this. But then when I heard Alex Jones talking about the New World Order, that was my understanding of it. But then first when I got into college, I took foreign policy classes. I got a more understanding of what the New World Order was. But first when my professor mentioned the New World Order, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to get confirmation of my beliefs. But in the end, I found out what it really was.
Oh, what is it?
Just a term coined by Bush to mark the end of the Cold War, right, and how we're going to tackle the rest of the world.
So it's just what the world is like now as opposed to what it was before, because the Soviet Union has fallen, essentially.
Yes.
Yeah, it's very interesting if you look at the history of that term. There's a website called the American Presidency Project, which has the text of everything that every president has ever said, and you can search for it for a particular term, and then you can see how many times each president said it. And it does get mentioned from time to time, but people, I think, are not really referring to a specific thing a lot of the time. It's just, this is what's new in the world. Like, if after the First World War, there was a new world order. After the Second World War, there was a new world order. After the fall of the Soviet Union, there was a new world order. And now there's probably going to be another new world order, because there's going to be some other big change in the world. England has left, or Britain has left Europe. That creates a new world order in Europe. So, yeah, it's very interesting, I think, that these terms take on a life of their own, and it's really just people are missing out information.
Yeah, the absence of information.
Yeah. Like one thing I try to do when debunking is not so much try to correct things, but figure out what people are missing and then just try to supply them with information. Would you say that's similar to what you're doing with your work?
My tactic mostly with what I try to do when I try to confront conspiracy theorists, try to ask them questions. Like if they say, okay, the World Trade Center came down in controlled demolition, you could ask them, okay, how did they do it? Was it done by wires or wireless detonation? Or how many bombs are we talking about? So as they ponder, they'll start to ask questions themselves.
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of people, I think, don't look into it beyond the initial information that's given to them in videos. You mentioned you watched the video Zeitgeist, and this is a movie that kind of ties in 9/11 with religion and the money supply. It's kind of a 3-part overarching conspiracy. And you were being very interested in Mormonism at that time. Can you tell us a bit about how that all tied together with the Zeitgeist and your interest in Mormonism?
Well, when I first got interested in Mormonism, I thought this would be the next step to my religious path, because that's what the Book of Mormon is. It's a sequel to the Bible, or You could call it Christian fan fiction, but
That's
and
a good term.
as I got interested in it, heard of the South Park episode on Mormonism, and then I thought to myself, there's no way it could be that laughably fake when it comes to specific claims. And this was the first time in my life something I started to sincerely believe could be wrong. And once that starts, you start to ask questions of other things you might believe that you're basing it on very narrow sources.
So you would say this South Park, essentially a South Park humorous debunking video of Mormonism, started you on your journey into skepticism.
Yes, I started asking questions of all these outlandish claims.
Yeah, it's interesting because, South Park obviously isn't something people would think of, but that episode is a fairly factual portrayal of the claims of Mormonism. Like Joseph Smith looked into his hat to get some of the translations of the tablets, I believe. And these are things that are actually in Mormon history, and they were just portraying them. And it does seem somewhat ridiculous. I think the Mormons themselves know that it seems a bit ridiculous, and a lot of them actually like that South Park episode. And the Book of Mormon, things like that, things that seem like they're mocking Mormonism, in some ways are actually very real depictions of it. But anyway, so Zeitgeist, what did you get out of Zeitgeist?
Zeitgeist, if anybody watches it, it really does question the whole perspective that we live in, because it starts with religion, then it starts with, of course, 9/11 attacks, and it starts with the banking system. But that really pushes you into a corner because it's making all these claims, but then when you start to look at debunkings and academic examination of some of the claims it makes about religion, which are not necessarily accurate, but once you get into those claims, you start to realize it's as if this person came up with a conclusion and made up facts.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how familiar you are with the Zeitgeist, with its
I've seen it,
with its fabricated quotes from certain figures.
I don't know specifics, but I remember they did something about the Son of God being the sun, and therefore it's the Egyptian god Ra, and they made these very spurious connections. But perhaps they sounded good on the video, but didn't actually pan out.
Some of them are interesting. Like, I'm not disputing some of the religious claims it makes, but it goes to a conclusion that is not really backed up, saying that Christianity was a deliberate hoax by people who knew exactly what they were doing. So I think that's a bit of a stretch.
Yes. I would think so. And that's true for, I think, a lot of these uber conspiracies, where it's an overarching conspiracy. It seems a bit of a stretch that there's just a small group of people pulling the strings of everything in the world, when you know just how complicated the world is. So after you started questioning things, after watching South Park and the episode on Mormonism, you got more interested in looking at the debunking side of things. Did that go straight into that, or was there like some other thing that triggered it along with the South Park thing?
It was my religious experience with Mormonism and also with Zeitgeist, because when I found out that a claim I sincerely believe from Zeitgeist could be wrong, just like I did with Mormonism, that combination made me look at other debunkings.
Right, but you wouldn't obviously have immediately flipped to believing everything in the mainstream. I would imagine it would have taken a while to. Yeah. And I'm sure you don't still believe everything in the mainstream media, obviously, like nobody does. But so what was the next step? What types of things were you looking into after that?
After that, I started to believe less outlandish stuff, but still stuck to other conspiracies that were, I thought, less outlandish, just because my political bias back then. Because it went from me believing 9/11 was an inside job to saying, okay, Alex Jones is wrong about 9/11, but he's right about the underwear bomber being staged.
Yeah, I could see you kind of stepping down the intensity of the implausibility of the beliefs. What do you think of Alex Jones being removed from YouTube?
I honestly think it's a disappointment, because that was the Alex Jones archive where anybody can look at his past. And some of the interviews were interesting. The one interview I kind of liked for nostalgia reasons was his interview with the late Alan Colmes. when he got on the show. Also, his interview with Donald Trump's gone now, so I tried searching for it online. I can't really find it anywhere else.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I'm not sure if it's going to be a net good, because there's going to be a lot of pushback from people thinking it validates the government censoring things. Like it basically says his predictions came true, that the government will try to shut him down, which I think is going to rile up his base to a degree. But of course, it's also going to limit his audience, so less people will see him, but maybe you'll see an intensification of a smaller number of people. You mentioned a few times chasing ghosts. What do you mean by chasing ghosts?
We do better when we try to focus on things that are real rather than chasing things that are imaginary.
Right.
And make believe. Like you've mentioned that a couple times. I think when you're on the Joe Rogan show, said do better than tackling the world's problems.
Yeah. I think conspiracy theories that are false are obviously going to be a distraction from real problems and real actual conspiracies. So yeah, I would agree with you there. Chasing ghosts is a bad thing. So I see you've been reading Behold a Pale Horse, which is a book by William Cooper, was a very old school conspiracy theorist who I think died in the 90s or the early 2000s?
Yes.
90s. What have you learned from looking at Behold a Pale Horse?
It's interesting. I think if Cooper were alive today, he'd be just as influential because he was a rival of Alex Jones in the 1990s. He had a pretty insightful analysis of Alex Jones and his Y2K scare. And I don't know if you've seen that. It's pretty funny. I reviewed the whole book. Like the whole thing, you think it's a joke when it talks about the alien claims, saying that there were interplanetary treaties with aliens. We've been in communication. We have moon bases. And spoiler alert, he backtracked on those alien claims completely. He went from saying there's all this stuff to saying that there's no evidence of aliens ever existing.
Really? It's very, very interesting that even people who are very deep down the rabbit hole can get out of various sub-rabbit holes, at least. I think it's kind of good to be aware of. Lots of people get out of the rabbit hole. It's not an impossible thing. It just seems like they're really stuck down there. You were big into conspiracy theories for a couple of years, right?
It was 2 years, roughly.
And during that time, did your friends and family try to talk you out of it?
Some of them actually believe some of the stuff, mainly the anti-Obama sentiment, but there were, like my dad, he tried to talk me out of listening to Alex Jones. It didn't affect the relationship-wise, but it was like you have your opinions, I have my opinions.
Right.
Even if they're effing crazy.
Did you think his trying to talk you out helped at all in the long run?
Yes, because you have someone to talk to saying, probably my family was the only one that was telling me that maybe this isn't someone you should listen to. So
would you say, in a way, like your family situation and those around you kind of eased your transition into the rabbit hole because they were conservatives, anti-Obama types? They're conservative anti-Obama types and it was mainly because Alex Jones was the inside job guy. Because saying Bush is a mass murderer, that doesn't rub well with him. So now you've kind of switched teams. How's that affected your relationships with those members of your family? They're okay with it, but I actually don't want to get in personal details. But it's much better now. Good. Yeah, because people, I think, worry a lot about getting into discussions with family members because it's very, very touchy, and family relationships are difficult enough as it is, and if you introduce new areas of conflict, it can be difficult for people. I myself have to sometimes not exactly tiptoe, but you have to think about the other family members' feelings. Like some of my family is religious, and bringing up the topic of religion because I'm an atheist, it makes it kind of difficult sometimes to have a conversation. But if you just simply respect the other person and respect that they have a differing opinion, people can usually get along. It's not like there's going to be the end of the world just because you have irreconcilable opinions on one thing. There's plenty of other things to talk about. So what are your plans for the future with the ex-conspiracy theorist?
Well, I'm trying to expand mainly by I recently started my Patreon page, trying to get money to expand social media wise, whether that's making high quality videos regarding conspiracy theories. I already did part 1 of my review of William Cooper's book, and part 2 is going to be about William Cooper himself.
Very interesting. Yeah, William Cooper's an interesting chap because there's a guy on my forum who used to be a friend of William Cooper's who is now a kind of a hardcore debunker. So I think it's a lot of the times you get these people who were in a certain world, and when they get out of it, they feel compelled to explain why that world was wrong. Why do you think you want to do what you're doing? What compels you?
Because I've seen what it does to people. Like, I didn't have the most horrific experience, but there are plenty of more sad stories of people who have gone down this path, how it's affected their family, friends, losing their job, being called out on the internet when it's seen that they're part of a conspiracy movement that offends people, whether that's 9/11, accusing someone of running a sex trafficking ring.
The Pizzagate thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the things you got to get across to people is that it's fine to be very passionate about a topic, but if your topic is incorrect, then it's also fine for people to be passionate about debunking that topic. People like say, why don't you just let me believe what I want to believe? And I think that's kind of a nonsensical thing to say when it comes to things that are fact-based, like 9/11.
Well, what I would say to that, like you say, why can't you just let me believe what I want to believe? I would say because you vote, and there are millions of like you that they're voting with this in mind.
Yeah, people make decisions based upon their beliefs, and it's not just voting; it's their life decisions. Like the alternative medicine type people who believe that there's this huge conspiracy to cover up these cheap cures for cancer, they might end up not giving their children the medicine they need. So there can be real harm from things that are essentially conspiracy theories. When you talk to people about conspiracy theories, say someone came up to you and said, I think 9/11 was an inside job because it's obvious that the buildings came down from controlled demolition because you can see these giant puffs of smoke. What would your approach be to just start the conversation there?
I would simply ask, can you name a single fireproof explosive that doesn't make sound? In the case of the towers, it would be hundreds or thousands or whatever the math was you did on the towers.
Yeah, well, I suppose they would say nanothermite, and then nanothermite that's encased in some fireproof material like asbestos. How would you move on from if someone just dropped something like that in your lap?
I would just say, are you saying the plane didn't rub it off when it hit the towers?
Yeah. It's the thing is, you get this constantly shifting goalposts with conspiracy theorists. It's a difficult thing to pin people down. I always try to make them focus on one point rather than jumping from point to point. Have you been involved in online communities with other conspiracy theorists? Like when you were a conspiracy theorist, did you join Facebook groups and things like that?
Honestly, I didn't even know about Facebook groups until I think it was 2013, which is well after that. But I was mainly sticking to YouTube and all the conspiracy channels that were out there and comments.
So did you actually have interaction with other conspiracy theorists, though?
I didn't attend rallies or anything because I thought that would be a bridge too far for me. Going out with me, we're holding a sign that says 9/11 was an inside job. That's something I thought may not be the best course of action.
So would you say you were basically just a consumer of conspiracy theorists? You weren't.
Yeah,
really,
that's a better.
Right. You watched a lot of conspiracy videos. Did you watched a lot of conspiracy videos? Did you have other information sources, or were you limiting yourself to more conspiracy-oriented things like Alex Jones? And did you watch the TV news, for example?
I watched it, but just when Alex Jones said some stuff was happening, and I turned on the news for myself and would look at it every now and then. But looking at mainstream news, supposedly kind of helps you get away from your very narrow sources, but with me, it just didn't help. Like, I just looked at the news and went back to listening to Alex Jones.
So where do you get your news now? If you want to follow what's going on in the world, what do you do personally?
Variety of sources. Of course, I listen to mainstream media because that's pretty much what we have now, but also media analysts like Media Matters, or people who work on freelance with journalism, but they're not really part of big media like the New York Times. Like, if the New York Times is getting something wrong, there's nothing wrong with calling them out on it.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we should trust yet verify, I think, is the best way of looking at it. We know that they're generally correct. Do you look at any of the fact-checking sites like factcheck.org or PolitiFact or Snopes?
Yeah, factcheck.org. That was one of the first, well, not really conspiracy debunking, but just generally like facts spewed out by politicians that they check out. But PolitiFact, they're unbelievable.
In what way?
Just of how many claims they accumulate from specific figures, how they organize statements by political figures, and how much false claims Trump has made.
Yes, that's quite unbelievable in itself. All right. Well, thank you very much, John. Is there anything you'd like to add, or like give a shout out for your website before we go?
Yeah, sure. You could follow me on Facebook at The X Conspiracy Theorist, or go to my YouTube channel, The X Conspiracy Theorist, or if you want to help, donate to my Patreon, which is on my website. You could find it out at exconspiracy.blogspot.com.
All right. Thank you very much, John, and have a good day.
You too, man. Appreciate it.
This was the first episode of Tales from the Rabbit Hole. You can follow us on the web at TFTRH.com or metabunk.org. You can find me on Twitter at Mick West. You can find me on YouTube at Mick West. You can find me on Facebook at Metabunk. And you can always subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. This has been Mick West with Tales from the Rabbit Hole.